Hi there, I'm John from CNCKing.com, and today we're going to talk about prototyping to produce a finished pencil holder. My goal with this project was to find an efficient way to produce a custom pencil holder. The only thing that's made up of this is pine and glue, and everything else, this is laser engraved here. But before I got to this point here, I decided, well, what's the most efficient way of producing this item? And it's actually pretty straightforward. Here's my prototype. So you can tell the difference right off the bat. Most efficient way would be to produce a solid block of pine, make it made up of 4 pieces. Now pine is really nice because if you grab it from the same board, it just melts together absolutely perfectly. You can barely see that this is made up of 4 different boards. You can't even see it here. You can maybe see it on the film here. There's a little bit of a line going across. But pine is a really good material to start putting together because it forms such a nice block. It glues wonderfully because it's not very dense. So the glue gets absolutely everywhere. So again, most efficient way of producing a pencil case is to produce a solid block. After that, I thought, well, I want to go 4 inches deep, which is what I did here. But my goal was to just drill in the holes and call it a day. I found out that's probably the worst way to make this project. So let's take a look at a couple of the steps that got me to this point. After I let the glue dry overnight, you had basically glue just going everywhere, all dried up. So the most efficient way to get rid of that is just to run it through the bandsaw to make everything nice and flush all the way around. And then before I was going to actually do the sanding, I wanted to make all the holes. Now it's the first time I use fastener bits for this kind of application, and I'd say for the first inch or two going down into this material, which is pine, it worked actually really well. I was kind of surprised. But then as you started going to 4 inches deep, what would happen is that basically you end up like a mill and you're grinding the same pine over and over and over again. You're producing very fine dust, and the fastener bit starts to smoke and everything gets hot. And really you're not progressing very deep very fast because everything is just sort of stuck together and just sort of mixing everything together instead of cutting through material. So then I decided what I'll do is I'll go different sizes. So I went from a smaller fastener bit to a larger one. That made a big difference. But still, when I started to get to a certain amount of depth, there's just so much friction going on with wood that basically everything just gets hot and everything slows right down production wise. all the holes with the fastener bit, I found out that because it was such a slow and hot process, the finish on the inside of the holes was just horrible. You can still sort of see the bottom as well. Now I made this 2 different heights or 3 different heights just so you can see it in the video. But this is sanded, and even then with the light, as you can see, it's still very rough. It's not the finish that I wanted to produce for a pencil holder. The other issue I had with the fastener bit is because I was grinding over and over and over again, it was very hard to figure out how actually deep I was. And the reason is because you don't know if you're going through the material or you're going through sawdust or what you're going through. So it's a bit of a mess. So if I was going to produce 1,000 of these things here, my initial idea to do it this way was actually a pretty bad one. Now you'll notice during the whole production of this version 1 here that I didn't use any CNC machines. We have CNC router, CNC laser, all this kind of stuff, equipment, but I wanted to produce this thing manually, just using regular tools, because that's when you really learn what the good things are and the bad things are about a design. CNC sort of spoils you because you go around so many ways, and basically you're telling the machine to produce it instead of you producing it by hand. So what I wanted to do for sure with the second version was to produce it far more efficiently. Now here's the second version that I have here. It started off exactly the same as the first. It's exactly the same pine, roughly the same dimensions. The only difference is I decided here is that I was going to use the laser to cut out the inside parts right off the bat. And the reason for that is because if I have the insides already cut out, I don't need to drill the holes. So that was my thought between this version 2.0. And if you look really closely, you can still sort of see where I laser cut out the pattern. That's the darkness. It's not all of this here that you see, this darkness. That's not glue, that's actually the laser. I cut a little bit too deep. So version 3.0 would solve some of these little issues that I found out while producing 2.0. I hope you remember in the earlier video that I used the bandsaw to cut everything even on this one here to remove the glue. On this one I didn't have to because everything was perfect to the scale that I wanted it to be. And as a result, all I had to really do was sand everything flush instead of cutting it and then sanding it. Now, using a CNC tool means all of the 4 parts were totally perfect in every way. While using hand tools, I had to give myself a lot more room to play around with stuff because you need a lot more give and take. Like I said, CNC machines are incredibly precise and accurate. Hand tools, rulers, all that kind of stuff, there's nowhere near as accurate. So when you're actually producing something, let's say for on-demand production, let's say I had to make a whole bunch of these things here. Using hand tools, each one would have a bit of a variation, while with the CNC router, laser, whatever, they all have a lot more of a closer fit and finish. Now in this case here, what I did is actually use the bandsaw to cut out the template because I wanted the inside of this here to be just natural wood. I didn't want the burned look. I was looking at using our CNC router to produce it, but I had the laser between projects working anyway, so I decided to cut a quick template and play around with the bandsaw to cut them out. Now again, another big difference between version 1 and version 2 is version 1, I just cut the blocks roughly to size and I glued it together, then I made the holes. Version 2, I already had all the holes there as part of the design, so all I had to do was glue the parts together to form the finished piece and then just sand everything nice and flush. Now in this case here, I had a few more boards, offcuts and that kind of stuff, while this one here produced it from one solid board. So as a result, when you look at the edge, you'll notice that you can actually see the different grain patterns. So that was something that was kind of a surprise because on the first one, you really have to look hard to see any kind of grain. So I'm not sure which kind of look I prefer. It's just a different kind of look. next step for producing this custom pencil case for me was actually to engrave it, because this is a birthday present for my parents. You can see the original one I had and the new version. I far prefer the newer version. It's a lot sharper, it's a lot easier to produce, it's a lot more efficient to produce if I had to make a whole bunch of them. And the consistency across the board is a lot higher on this one here. I think this video is a wonderful case study as to sort of the production methods we use here in the shop to make items custom spec. I never made something like this before. This was my first try, and this is my second try, and there'll probably be a third try based on what I learned from the first one and the second one. Now you might say, well, you know, I like the squarish, but I would actually like to have it round. Well, here you have the results that are rounded and they're a bit rough, but there is a way to sort of roundish this if you wanted to. One would be to use the router to round it off. The other one would be to use the router actually to cut out these pieces, which is something I'll probably try next time around, but actually have a bit of a bevel going all the way around. So there's a lot of further customization that's possible with woodworking and any other stuff that we do here custom in the shop. So if you're looking for a custom pencil holder or custom whatever out of wood, plastic, metal, corian, whatever, contact me at CNCKing.com.